It was day 16 of our trip when the sound of nearby thunder awoke us. We were in Monticello, Utah, only a few miles from the border into Colorado. Despite the threat of foul weather, we struck out to the east, eager to see what new adventures would come our way.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to day 16 of the TransAmerica Trail.
I see some antlers.
That last one. Supposed to turn to the left here. Welcome to Colorado, Ray. That should be Dove Creek ahead. So we're going briefly off the TransAmerica Trail. We're going to go out here to this canyon overlook.
Dolores Canyon Overlook. Isn't this spectacular?
This is spectacular.
Wow.
Coming back on the TransAmerica Trail, right?
Copy.
And we have turned into Dolores Canyon, but much further downriver from where the overlook was. And are headed down into the canyon where we will cross near Bradfield Bridge. Like rain ahead, right?
It does look like rain ahead, Mark.
So Ray had an idea as we were passing by this lake just off to the left here, and he saw a house that had a cabin next to it that appeared to be empty. So he said, "Hey, let me go ask the people who own that house if they'd be willing to let us rent their cabin for the night." So he's walked up there to do that. Maybe Ray got lucky. This is what Ray secured for us. It's just a shack the guy rents out. You think this is it?
I believe it is, Mark.
I'd rather sit on a one-holer than have to use our porta potties. Uh-oh.
It's a two-holer.
Ray, you and I are not sharing this two-holer.
You are absolutely correct, Mark.
Big shrimp.
Yeah, they are some nice shrimp.
So we got cilantro and lime rice boiling up here. Ooh, smelling good, so good.
Yes.
Oh, you know what we call that?
Good.
Oh, yeah.
Look at
Yeah, we call that dinner.
that. Mr. Richard, sir. Come on over. You want to try one? Try at least one.
Cook that on the grill there.
Yeah.
Man.
You like light beer?
Oh, yeah.
Well, you come with your own beer? You're my kind of guy.
Despite the threat of stormy weather all day, we were never rained upon. The scenery during the drive was great, and finding a hunting cabin to use that night was a wonderful bonus. We enjoyed the company of Richard, a retired USGS geologist, before sending a few of the shrimp back with him to share with his wife.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to day 17 of the TransAmerica Trail. Ray and I spent the night in an old semi-trailer that had been converted to a makeshift cabin. It was nice. We didn't have any running water, but we did have electricity. Going to be turning off for Ophir Pass here momentarily. So we've just turned off the highway and are now headed towards Ophir and up over Ophir Pass. There's the town of Ophir down there.
Just below Ophir Pass is a narrow stretch across a steep talus slope. The courtesy is one way at a time. Wait until oncoming traffic has passed before beginning that section. Contrary to conventional practice, however, the USFS website says if two vehicles meet, uphill traffic pulls over for downhill. Two motorcycles approached behind Ray and I as we waited, so we told them to go first, then headed up behind them. However, a vehicle stopped at the top began its own descent. Then, as Ray and I were pulled over for that vehicle, another one came up behind me. Fortunately, everyone made it through okay.
Oh, I don't like this.
I got a Jeep behind me now. Can you tell if that guy on the motorcycle dropped his bike? He's been there for a while.
Hey, it does look like he did.
Okay. You should have waited at the top.
I was going to, but I didn't think you guys were moving.
That's
I'm
you.
sorry.
That's okay. Mistakes happen. Have a safe trip. Thank you. Not very much. I suspect this is just leftovers from Lincoln.
Don't look like he can move his bike, Mark, so we may have to help him stop here.
This guy's dropped it again. I don't know if you saw it or not.
I don't think he's very probably our highest elevation. You gotta be really experienced with this.
Yeah, he said that was the problem. New bike and the inexperienced driver.
You think I should stop or not?
Yeah, we can stop right here. About 3 or 4 miles to the turnoff from the highway for Silverton, and Silverton's about another 6 or 7 miles away down the highway. So here we are at the bottom of Ophir Pass, and we're going to pop out on Highway 550, the $1 Million Highway.
After crossing Ophir Pass, it was a short descent to the $1 Million Highway. Not having a hotel or campground reservation in the local tourist towns, we headed for Montrose. We'd visit the Red Mountain Mining District during the drive. And with tomorrow being Saturday, we'd mull over our next day's plan. Stick with the TAT or skip some of this crazy busy area and head further east to pick it back up. Hello everyone, welcome back to my home office. And this afternoon I thought I'd talk a little bit about the mods that I've done to my Jeep. And of course I've touched on some of this already. For example, I talked about the electrical mods earlier. And so I don't plan to do a lot of repeating of that. I may refer to it just a little bit, but I don't plan to repeat the information that was already made available in that video. But I want to talk to you about a lot of the other mods. There is one other video right along this line that I intend to do, and that is how camp life is done, cooking and setting up a tent and sleeping arrangements, this kind of stuff. So I'm not going to go into that either. So I'm not even going to open the back of my Jeep so you can see that in this video. You'll have to wait for another video for that one. But it'll be coming soon in a few days. So how about we get on it? Well, to start with, I own a 2007 Jeep Wrangler Unlimited X. Today the X's would be called a Sport. It is Jeep green, and it has a 6-speed manual transmission. I love manual transmissions, if you haven't heard me go on about that in the past. I have a 2.5-inch coil lift. It consists of heavier than normal OME springs because of the weight of my Jeep. Other suspension mods includes a Synergy tie rod and drag link, a TerraFlex Monster track bar, and a TerraFlex 9550 steering stabilizer. And I upgraded the linkage there because I had a problem with a bent drag link, the OEM drag link, and then I went with the Curry gear, which is extremely heavy, and so heavy it tears up the rod ends in no time at all. I think it's okay for a rock crawler that you trailer to wherever you're going to crawl across rocks, but it's not so good on an overlanding rig. I also have Riddler differential covers on the front and rear of the Jeep. They're cast iron covers, real heavy duty, and do a nice job protecting the differential area. That blue stain you see on that one is from the windshield washer fluid. It's a problem the way they mounted the pump in the reservoir for the windshield washer fluid. It's not a good seal, and so when it gets cold it tends to weep a little bit of fluid out and leave a little blue stain there on the ground. I also have Synergy ball joints. I replaced the OEM ball joints the first time with crown ball joints. The OEMs lasted about, actually for me I got about 90,000 miles. The crowns lasted about 35 or 40,000 miles, and so these Synergy ball joints, which are greasable, have been on there for about 100,000, maybe even 120,000 miles now. So, and just to answer the question, yesterday I turned over 246,000 miles on the Jeep. I have Rancho RS 9000 XL shocks. They're nice shocks. They're an adjustable shock, but I will say that after they've been on the Jeep for a while, that little plastic knob, that little red knob you see on the bottom of the shock there, it doesn't turn very well. So I would say they're not adjustable to where you can set it for this on the street and this on the dirt. They're adjustable for when you put them in your Jeep, adjust them the way you want them, and don't plan on adjusting them again, at least not after a few months of use in mud and dirt and grime. I also have TerraFlex adjustable front lower control arms. I put these on because when you lift a vehicle, it tends to throw the caster off, and what happens is the steering wheel becomes very light, and you don't have good on-center feel for the steering wheel. With the adjustable front lower control arms, I could readjust the caster back where it belongs and return that steering feel to normal. I also have TerraFlex front sway bar quick disconnects. The reason I like the TerraFlex isn't because of the linkage itself that you see there. Rather, it's because of the pin that you can store it on instead of having to zip tie it up. If you look in the upper left corner, you'll see a little stainless steel pin sticking out. And when I disconnect the sway bar, it connects up to that, and that keeps the sway bar out of the way. Other brands, they expect you to use a zip tie to zip tie the sway bar out of the way while you've got it disconnected. And to answer the question, in case you're not aware, the X does not have the electrical disconnect that the Rubicon has. It would be nice, but I don't have that. So yes, I do have to crawl under the Jeep if I want to disconnect the sway bar. On the rear end, I have a JKS track bar. That is adjustable. Again, when you lift the Jeep, it tends to shift the axles to the left and to the right, depending whether it's front or rear, so that the tires are not tracking behind each other. And so I wanted to straighten that out, and with the track bar up front, I can recenter the axle left and right as you're looking at the vehicle right now, and same thing for the rear. When you lift a vehicle, along with the axle shifting left to right, it also tends to rotate just a little bit, and that it rotates in the case of the rear axle backwards, and in the case of the front axle forwards. And what that does is takes the spring perch and makes them so they're not at the proper angle that they're supposed to be. And so when a spring rests directly on that spring perch in the rear axle, it tends to bow backwards a little bit. And it actually, on the passenger side, it actually can bump into the track bar. It gets so close. So that rubber wedge that you see there, it's actually a wedge shape. It's fat in the back and narrow in the front. That takes that spring and allows it to have a level perch again. It also gives about a half-inch lift on the spring. Because I sometimes run really heavy, I have timbrins on the rear axle, and basically that's just an extended bump stop, and it keeps the Jeep from sagging too much in the rear. Of course, everybody's probably interested, what tires are you running, Mark? I'm running BF Goodrich KO2 ATs, and they're 35-inch, they're E-rated tires, and they're on Pro Comp Series 789 alloy wheels. I ran Duratrex for a long time, Goodyear Duratrex, and I like the Goodyear Duratrex. The one disadvantage of them is they are a little bit easier to puncture, especially the sidewalls are a little soft on them. I will say that the Goodyear tires are amazing in the snow, the Duratrex. And people ask me, how do you like the Goodrich, the KO2s, Mark? And I'm like, they're amazing tires, but I have not had them on the snow and ice yet. We had a mild winter last year here in Oklahoma, and I didn't get in any significant snow, so I can't really say how they compare to the Duratrex. But the Duratrex, performance-wise, are an outstanding tire. And the KO2s have been really good to me, but I'm just reserving final judgment on them until I actually get them in some snow and can speak from personal experience. The front bumper is from a company called Schrockworks out of Houston. It is their mid-width front winch bumper, and it has the optional winch hoop. I like this bumper a lot. It is very strong. On the rear, I also have a Schrockworks bumper, and I have the swing-out tire rack. You can see a spare KO2 mounted there, and I have the optional cargo rack and jerry can mounts. And I also have Schrockworks rock rails. You're starting to see a theme here, aren't you? And if you've watched videos with me and Ray, or videos with me and Jack, or videos with me and Ray and Jack, you may have noticed that they also run similar gear all around their Jeeps from Schrockworks. It's a good company. Back in 2007, when the new Jeeps were coming out, the evaporative canister was put way down on the bottom of the Jeep where it could be easily damaged if you coming across a rock or a tree, or fallen tree or something like that. And so I relocated it, and this is just a photo of where it's relocated. And I used a kit from Dominion Off-Road. I also have some components from Evo Manufacturing, some protection components. On the front of that, you can see a small plate welded. That is the front lower control arm, and the plate is welded on there and protects that from getting hit from a rock. Of course, when I'm moving forward, the rock would be coming off the left of the screen there and hit that mounting bracket right there and cause it to jam up, making it difficult to work on the control arm. Similar on the rear. This one's mounted below the shock and protects that area down there. There's a good picture, by the way, of that adjustment knob for the RS 9000s. Back to another Dominion off-road mod. The steering stabilizer was in a vulnerable spot, so I relocated it. It's a little bit higher now, and I also I had an interference problem with all that linkage down there, so my steering stabilizer now connects to the drag link. I was concerned about damage to the oil pan. It's an expensive part to replace, and so from Rancho I bought a Rock Gear oil pan protection. This just basically glues onto the original oil pan, making it a thicker piece of metal. After I had put it on there, maybe a month or two afterwards, I was driving across a dirt road. About an hour later, after I was finished what I was doing, I turned around and come back the other way in the dirt, along this dirt road, and I saw this red thing laying in the road, and I said, "What is that?" And I realized what it was. My Rancho Rock Gear oil pan protection had fallen off. So You can see I have now safety wired it, and I used a JB Weld the second time instead of whatever adhesive they had sent with it. When Ray and I went to Alaska, one of the things we were concerned with was rocks being thrown up. And so we put various protections for the front end. And right there you can see, this is really nice. It's from Metal Masters. And I wasn't able to find the Metal Masters item, but it looks like Red Rock 4x4 makes the same item. I think maybe they bought them out or something. I'm not sure. You pull the grill off, this mounts to the inside. It's made out of metal. It is not plastic. It is very well made. And then in order to match that, Ray managed to find a motorcycle place that had these stone guards that fit on our headlights. I run IPF headlights. I should have mentioned that when I was talking about my electrical mods. When I bought the IPF headlights, they came with blue light bulbs. I didn't like the blue light bulbs, so I went to my local auto parts store and I bought just the cheapest Sylvania halogen lights. And these are way better than the stock lights that this came with, the 2007 Wranglers came with. The KC lights come with a plastic guard that goes over the front of them with a big giant KC on it. The first ones I had actually had a smaller KC, then the next ones had a big giant KC, and I was like, I'm not going to advertise for KC like this. So I found these covers, and they're solid. I like that a lot better. They actually provide real protection against small debris flying up and hitting the lights. So I have them both on the driving lights and on the overhead lights. On the rear, I have the Rugged Ridge Euro taillight guards. And, you know, there's not much problem I'm going to have something hit that, except for my tire swing gate in the event that I should do something silly, like drive off and forget to latch it closed. I've never done that more than 2 or 3 times. You can see this one's been hit a couple of times when I do that. I have limb risers on my Jeep, and they're from Off-Road Elements. I contacted them, and instead of having it go to the windshield frame, as their original product does, I talked to them and says, is there a way I can get some slightly longer ones that go up to my overhead rack, because I had an existing place to put it on the overhead rack. And they said, sure. And so they basically made me a custom kit and saved me a little bit of money because I didn't need the brackets that went into the windshield itself, so they didn't ship it with that. And they fit just fine. I love them. And in case you're wondering what they do, well, of course, they lift limbs up. But here's a picture of my Jeep when Ray and I got to Payette, Idaho, and had to go through that. And Ray's Jeep looked quite similar to this, except he didn't have the limb risers. And that's what happened to his Jeep as we were driving through Oregon. All that happened during that one trip. So they're beneficial. Some of the other things I've done to the Jeep, I have Yukon 488 gears in it. I have an Auburn locker in the front, and I have an Eaton locker in the rear. They're both E-lockers. They're controlled through the S-Pod. You should have seen that when you saw the electrical mods video. I have Superior axles on the front. They're no longer available for some reason, so you'll have to go with another manufacturer. I'm not sure what happened to them, but they are chromoly. I have a center force dual friction clutch, and I like that a lot. It's got a real light feel. I also put a center force throwout bearing in it. And I replaced the Jeep clutch at about 100,000 miles, not because the clutch was bad, but because the throwout bearing went bad. And so I figured, well, while we're in there, let's put a different clutch in there. And actually, I've had to replace the throwout bearing one more time since then. At some point in the life of my Jeep, the front drive shaft started spitting grease out. The boot on it had failed. So I replaced it with a Tom Woods front drive shaft. The one advantage or disadvantage, depending on your perspective, is it does have to be greased. And one of the grease joints on it's difficult to get at. It's on the CV joint, and I have to pull the drive shaft out. I have to pull the skid plate off that protects the transmission transfer case area. Evo Manufacturing also provided me with axle sleeves and a C2 gusset kit. The gussets go on the axle C, which can bend easily, and so they reinforce that. And then the sleeves go up inside the axle tubes and thicken the walls on that tube, so it fixes some vulnerabilities on the front axle. That is a D30, a Dana 30. It's known to be weak and won't last very long. I mean, I've only got 246,000 miles on mine, right? And just for the record, I have blown gear sets, and the first gear set to go was on the Dana 44 rear end, and about a year later, the Dana 30 front end gear set. So I've been through a couple of sets of gears on my Jeep. I have a warm power plant, and that includes an air compressor. It's wonderful. And I have Tuss Dust synthetic winch line with the safety thimble instead of the hook. I also have a Hypertext Max Energy Power Programmer. This is the original version of it. It's not as fancy as the newer one, but it allows me to do the major thing that I needed to do, which is make sure that my speedometer reached correctly. And that's important because it's not just the speedometer, but it's tied to things like the mile per gallon gauge and the distance to empty and all those other things that depend on those sensors. Another Dominion off-road product, I put a high-performance catback muffler on there. So the original muffler is all the way back laterally across the back end of the Jeep, and it's actually kind of ugly looking down there when you look at the bottom of the Jeep. This moves it up forward some. It actually goes roughly where the evaporative canister was, so implicit in this is not only do you get a new muffler, but you have to relocate your evaporative canister and make it so that it's not quite as vulnerable. I replaced the brake lines on the Jeep with slightly longer ones from Crown Performance. The one complaint I have about them is they had a plastic sheath around them that eventually fell apart, and so I put some wire. This is actually a wire loom that you see over the top of it, a high temperature resistant wire loom. The early Jeep Wranglers had absolutely miserable sounding speakers, and so I replaced the front speakers, which is not easy. And it dramatically improved the quality of the audio. I went ahead and replaced the rear speakers, which with that year, it's impossible to get much audio out of the rear speakers. And when I replaced the rear speakers, which was actually about 6 months later, I didn't really notice any improvement. So if you've got one of the early model Jeeps that has this miserable sounding stereo, I recommend you get the Kicker speaker upgrade for just the front speakers. Don't even bother with the rears. You're not going to notice the difference. I have from Escape Gear cotton canvas seat covers, and I did have neoprene seat covers in the past. I did not like them. I actually went through a couple of sets of them in about maybe about 175,000, 200,000 miles. I went through a couple of sets of them. They tear up too easily. When it's hot out, you get hot and sweaty. These Escape Gear cotton canvas seat covers are made in Africa, and they are really nice. They also are not inexpensive, so don't even ask me how much they are. If you have to ask, you don't want them. When I got my Jeep originally, I didn't have a place to put a high lift, of course, so I bought a Tuss Stuff high lift hood rack, and it comes with the hardware to mount a shovel and an axe there. And my high lift now is mounted back on the Schrockworks swing gate, and so I've got a shovel and a axe there. The axe doesn't really see much use. The shovel I see occasionally used primarily for putting out campfires and stuff like that. I have a MBRP off-camber JK overhead rack, and I have the front extension and the basket, which are both optional. I had to modify the rack. A friend of mine, James, owner of Expedition Outfitters, did the welding work here for me, and because that pipe that you see there is supposed to extend all the way down the window frame, but there was a AEV snorkel in the way. So we fabricated that up. Mostly he did the fabrication, and I took a few pictures as he did the work. On top of the rack, he also helped me by fabricating a rack for a second spare tire. And you can see the bracket right there that I would tie the tire down with. I don't have it up there right now. Around town, I don't leave it up there. There's one of my old Duratrack tires. I use that as my second spare for the time being. Once I replace the KO2s, I'll go ahead and throw a KO2 up there instead. But that's how that would mount on top. It's just sitting there in my garage. As I mentioned, I had the AEV snorkel, and I have the optional pre-filter assembly. And I will say that you need to remove that pre-filter assembly when you're out of there in the woods and it's getting dust in it daily. I wasn't paying a lot of attention to that and didn't realize dust is in there. It kind of spins around, a little tornadic action, I guess. And it beats that dust until it's a fine, fine powder, which then can get through your air filter into your engine. And so you don't want that. So when you run one of those pre-filter assemblies, pull that out. If you're running the ram air intake, then you'll have to go ahead and change your air filter a little more frequently. I also have Uncle Bob's differential breather kit. You can put this kit together yourself if you want. But basically what it does is it extends all of the breather lines so that they connect up to the air box for the engine air intake. With the aftermarket differential covers that I have, the fill port is a little bit higher up on the differentials. What that means is if you go to a quick lube place and they fill that up until it's all the way full, what happens when it's hot is that oil can come up here along this line right here, because it's going to bubble out of the differential, and it can get inside your engine air intake, and you don't want that. James and his wife Brandy gave me these as a Christmas present. They're from Extreme Outback, I believe. And to tell you the truth, I can't remember. Several companies have these now. And it's obviously the tire valve cap, and it has that little strap on there, which means that when I'm out there airing down or airing up, I don't have to worry about what I do with my valve caps. It just stays stuck right there on the valve, the tire valve. And finally, my last mod, I'm going to go into specifics about my zip tie mod. The original Jeeps had a problem with the hood bouncing, and I put zip ties on there. I came across that on a forum I participate in, and it works. That's all I have to say. The hood does not bounce anymore when I pass truck traffic. I have some other things I can do with the Jeep. Jeeps are amazingly reconfigurable. There, by the way, you can see my old seat covers. And I have a safari top. I have a soft top. I have tube doors. I love to run with the tube doors, even with a hard top. Getting to this configuration now is much more difficult. And you'll see more of that when I get into the back end of the Jeep. You'll see the mods I've done back there. There's the picture of the Jeep with a soft top on it. And that's it. If you've got any questions, the discussion forum is there.